It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, with a series of irregularities in the transactions reported to the Federal Reserve. Anomalies so minor that they could have been dismissed as technical glitches. But to the trained eye of an experienced analyst, they were the first whispers of an invisible storm that threatened to engulf the American economy overnight. A storm whose existence the public would never be allowed to know about, and whose consequences, if unleashed, could erase decades of financial stability in mere hours. In Washington, D.C., the morning unfolded like any other. Sunlight spilled across the reflecting pools near the Capitol, tourists clicked cameras, and city dwellers hustled to work, unaware that the government's most critical institutions were already on high alert behind closed doors. Their alarms digital rather than audible, their crises measured in terabytes and financial codes rather than sirens and smoke. Inside the Federal Reserve's secure conference room, a dozen senior economists and cybersecurity experts huddled around glowing monitors, their faces pale and tense as lines of code scrolled past at lightning speed, revealing that several major banks had been infiltrated by a sophisticated cyber network that had not only stolen vast sums of money, but also gained the ability to manipulate stock trades, credit lines, and international transfers. Almost instantaneously, a digital puppeteer controlling trillions without a physical presence. The president, summoned urgently to the Oval Office, was briefed in a series of rapid-fire reports, each more alarming than the last, as advisors detailed how high-frequency trading algorithms were being manipulated to create artificial market crashes, how key bond markets showed signs of sudden depletion, and how liquidity in major financial hubs like New York, Chicago, and San Francisco was disappearing faster than it could be accounted for. The numbers fluctuating so wildly that even seasoned bankers felt a cold, instinctual fear. Meanwhile, on Wall Street, traders began noticing unusual patterns in the market, stocks soaring and plummeting in milliseconds, trading volumes spiking without any apparent reason, and automated investment programs executing millions of trades before human eyes could comprehend what was happening, triggering a quiet panic among those who understood that the system they trusted to safeguard the nation's wealth was under siege by an invisible enemy operating with extraordinary precision. At the Treasury Department, analysts traced suspicious transfers originating from offshore accounts, rapidly multiplying across multiple jurisdictions. While inside encrypted communication channels, whispers suggested that the perpetrators were an international consortium of hackers and rogue financial strategists. Individuals with military-level expertise in cyber warfare and an intimate knowledge of the American banking system capable of collapsing the economy if they wished, perhaps motivated by power, profit, or ideology. As the hours passed, the inner circle of the administration realized that public disclosure was impossible. Announcing the crisis could incite mass panic, trigger bank runs, and cause the very collapse they sought to prevent, so the government moved in shadows, coordinating with private banks through secure channels, rerouting transactions, freezing accounts selectively, all while maintaining a facade of normalcy. In the midst of this chaos, a young analyst named Emma Rivera, just 27, discovered a subtle yet critical vulnerability in the mainframe code, an overlooked sequence that revealed the attack was not random, but a deliberate, meticulously planned strike aimed at destabilizing the United States before the next global summit, an event that could allow adversaries to exploit weakened markets and influence international decisions in their favor. Her discovery triggered an intense all-night operation as teams of programmers, economists, and intelligence officers worked to isolate infected networks, patch systems, and create contingencies, knowing that any misstep could amplify the catastrophe. Meanwhile, the president, flanked by advisors and military intelligence officers, debated the ethical and strategic implications of their next steps, should they reveal the threat to the public to prepare them, risking widespread panic, or continue the delicate dance of concealment while attempting to neutralize the threat in secret. Across the nation, life continued as usual on the surface. Commuters navigated traffic, coffee shops, served espresso, and classrooms filled with students, none of whom would ever understand how close their lives had come to being disrupted by a shadow war fought in the digital veins of the economy. But beneath the surface, systems teetered on the brink. ATMs were vulnerable, stock exchanges held their collective breath, and billion-dollar investment portfolios could vanish in minutes if the attackers found a way to exploit the final loopholes. Each department, Defense, Treasury, Homeland Security, coordinated with painstaking precision, using encrypted communication lines, secure satellite networks, and covert financial maneuvers to shield key sectors from collapse, all while tracking the attackers' digital footprints across the globe, from Eastern Europe to Southeast Asia, as if chasing ghosts that left no physical trail. In the financial districts of New York, traders whispered of shadowy figures manipulating the market, while investigative journalists noticed anomalies but were swiftly dissuaded from reporting anything by sudden technical glitches that erased their data or delayed their stories, leaving them puzzled and frustrated, unable to uncover the reality lurking beneath layers of deception. By nightfall, the magnitude of the crisis became chillingly clear. Trillions of dollars had been moved, altered, or threatened. Major banks had been compromised, and the economy had survived only because of split-second decisions, improvisation, the quiet brilliance of a few dedicated analysts working against the clock. Their work unseen and unheralded, protecting millions of Americans who would never know how close they had come to financial ruin. And yet, even with temporary containment achieved, the fear lingered. The attackers remained at large, watching, calculating, and waiting for a moment of weakness, knowing that they had discovered the vulnerabilities in a system that prided itself on stability and strength. It's a system that, until that day, had seemed untouchable by the time the first rays of sunlight broke over the East River. The administration had secured the immediate threat, but faced a daunting truth. The crisis could return at any moment. It's potentially worse, more destructive, and far more personal in its impact on every citizen. And as the world celebrated an ordinary morning, the hidden war for the economy continued in silence. A war of code, calculation, and courage. Fought by unseen heroes who understood that one wrong move could mean losing not just money, but trust, security, and the very confidence that held the nation together. The morning after the crisis had been contained, the city seemed oblivious to the invisible chaos that had nearly erased its financial foundation. As if Washington, D.C. itself were a sleeping giant unaware of the storm that had passed beneath its streets, while inside the secure walls of the Treasury and Federal Reserve, the tension remained palpable, electric, as the analysts, advisors, and cyber experts reconvened to assess the damage, track residual vulnerabilities, and plan for the inevitable retaliation that they knew was coming from the perpetrators who had proven themselves capable of manipulating the very lifeblood of the American economy, and who, now thwarted temporarily, would surely adapt and strike again with a sophistication that would dwarf the initial assault. Emma Rivera, still running on adrenaline and little sleep, had become the linchpin of the operation, her discovery having revealed not only the source, but also the pattern of the attack. A sequence so intricate it suggested the involvement of multiple international actors working in unison, coordinated across time zones, exploiting weaknesses in both technology and human oversight. And as she briefed the president's inner circle, her voice calm but resolute, she outlined a strategy that would involve not just patching the system, but predicting the attackers' next moves, anticipating their logic, and staying several steps ahead in a digital chess game whose stakes were measured in trillions of dollars and the stability of an entire nation. Intelligence agencies scrambled to identify and locate the masterminds behind the attack, tracing digital footprints through encrypted networks, proxy servers, and shell companies, their findings pointing to a shadowy alliance of rogue financiers. Former military cyber specialists and mercenary hackers, some of whom had previously worked in sanctioned government projects but had since disappeared into the global underworld, and every lead pulled the team deeper into a web of international intrigue, involving countries who might claim ignorance, but whose infrastructure had been used as untraceable conduits for financial sabotage, complicating the political ramifications and forcing the president to tread carefully between secrecy, diplomacy, and decisive action. On Wall Street, the aftershocks of the night's events lingered like a low hum beneath the usual hustle. Traders whispered of new irregularities, hesitant investments, and banks cautiously reopening previously frozen credit lines, all while private meetings in penthouse offices and back rooms determined which institutions would survive, which mergers would be fast-tracked, which executives would be quietly removed to prevent exposure of the crisis. And though the public celebrated minor market gains, unaware of how close they had come to total collapse, the atmosphere among the financial elite was one of fear, calculation, and grudging respect for the invisible forces, both human and digital, that had shaped the night's outcome. As the day progressed, the president authorized covert countermeasures, not publicly, but through back channels that involved cyber defense units, private financial consortiums, and even selected members of the military with expertise in electronic warfare, deploying strategies to create false trails, delay potential attacks, and monitor suspicious international financial flows in real time, essentially setting traps for the attackers. Turning the crisis into a strategic game where information was power and missteps could have catastrophic consequences. Simultaneously, the administration grappled with internal tensions. Some advisors pushed for transparency, believing the public should be prepared for a possible recurrence, while others argued that revealing the threat would destabilize markets further and create a panic from which recovery would be impossible, and the debate stretched late into the night. Voices raised, arguments layered with legal, ethical, and political considerations, all while Emma and her team continued dissecting code, running simulations, and testing contingency protocols that could prevent the next wave of attacks before it began. In private moments, the analysts discussed the personal cost of the operation, the sleepless nights, the constant stress, the knowledge that failure could mean financial ruin for millions, and yet, despite the fear and exhaustion, there was an unspoken pride, a recognition that their work had saved a nation from a disaster few would ever know had nearly occurred, and that their vigilance, intelligence, quick thinking had created a fragile but vital barrier between stability and chaos. Internationally, rumors began to circulate of sudden, unexplained fluctuations in currency markets, movements of large sums in hidden accounts, and subtle manipulations that hinted at the same shadowy forces behind the American crisis, suggesting that the attack was not isolated but part of a larger strategy, a global game of power and influence, where the United States had been both a target and a testing ground, and where the next move could not just affect Wall Street but every economy connected to it, every international trade agreement, and every citizen whose life relied on financial systems operating as they should. Over the following days, Emma's team worked tirelessly to strengthen defenses, create redundancies, and deploy predictive algorithms designed to flag unusual patterns before they could escalate into crises, all while simultaneously tracking the attackers' possible next moves through a combination of intelligence, cyber forensics, and psychological profiling, attempting to anticipate not just technical actions but the human strategies behind them, and realizing that in many ways the crisis had evolved from a purely digital threat into a battle of wits, endurance, and willpower. Politically, the administration used the temporary calm to shore up alliances, both domestic and international, quietly coordinating with foreign banks, intelligence agencies, and cybersecurity firms to prevent the attackers from exploiting gaps across borders. And in closed-door meetings, world leaders discussed the implications, agreeing to cooperate in unprecedented ways to maintain financial stability, though each negotiation was laced with suspicion. Given that trust was fragile and the knowledge of potential vulnerabilities could shift global power balances in unexpected ways. As the week wore on, the story of the crisis remained classified, known only to a select few. While journalists and the general public speculated about minor market fluctuations, unaware that the nation had survived a digital siege that could have erased decades of wealth and destabilized governments worldwide, and that the calm they observed was the result of calculated vigilance, strategic intelligence, and the tireless efforts of individuals who operated in shadows, whose work would never be acknowledged, but whose impact had been profound. At home, ordinary citizens continued their routines, checking accounts, paying bills, and making purchases, unaware that the systems facilitating every transaction, from the smallest debit card swipe to the largest corporate merger, had been tested to the brink and survived only because of the skill, intuition, and courage of those few who had acted when seconds counted, and that the fragility they relied upon so implicitly had been exposed, studied, and fortified in ways invisible to the public eye. And yet, despite the containment, the threat had not vanished. Somewhere across oceans and hidden in networks, the attackers observed the American response, recalculating, adapting, and planning their next move. While inside the secure walls of the Federal Reserve, Treasury, and intelligence agencies, analysts, executives, and government officials prepared tirelessly, knowing that the real war was only beginning, a war that would be fought not with tanks or bombs but with data, code, influence, and foresight. And that the lessons learned in those harrowing hours of near-sea catastrophe would shape the country's financial strategies, cyber defenses, and policies for decades to come, leaving an indelible mark on the nation's history. A reminder that even the most powerful economy could be vulnerable. That vigilance was paramount, and that in a world increasingly dependent on technology, the line between order and chaos was thinner than anyone could imagine. And that one night of terror had revealed not only the threats that lurked unseen, but also the courage, intelligence, and resilience that could protect a nation from the brink of ruin.